45,000 years ago, in the frozen valleys of what is now Germany, a lone Neanderthal stood watch from the mouth of a limestone cave. Below him, the snow reflected a faint orange glow, the fires of strangers flickering across the valley floor. For hundreds of generations, these cliffs had been safe ground, a fortress of stone and height. But on that winter night, the balance of power began to shift. Those distant flames belonged to a new kind of human, one that would change the rules of survival forever. Until then, strength and proximity had defined the world of the Neanderthal. They hunted at close range, thrusting heavy spears with the full weight of their bodies. The mountains and ridges protected them, allowing gravity to turn every throw into a weapon of devastating force. But when modern humans arrived, they brought something entirely different: the mastery of distance. The bow and the atlatl transformed the battlefield of Ice Age Europe. A single arrow could now travel farther than any hand-thrown spear, striking from beyond sight, from beyond reach. In that moment, the world itself changed shape. Elevation no longer meant safety. The high caves that had guarded Neanderthal families for millennia became traps, exposed from every angle. The story that follows is not one of a single battle, but of a slow, relentless siege, a contest of technology, climate, and endurance that would decide the fate of two human worlds. For generations, the Neanderthals had mastered the art of survival through strength, proximity, and terrain. They knew every ridge, every echo, every shifting shadow on the limestone cliffs of Central Europe. Their world was built on the idea that closeness meant control, the power to strike before being struck. From the mouth of a cave, a Neanderthal could hurl a heavy spear downhill with crushing force, the slope itself multiplying the impact. In this geometry of survival, height was dominance, and the ground below was danger. But then, the equation changed. When modern humans entered these same valleys, they carried something entirely new, a technology that redefined distance. The bow and the atlatl, simple in form yet revolutionary in function, turned the open plains into a battlefield where reach meant power. An arrow could climb the air as easily as fall through it. A dart could strike from 100 feet away, guided by the flick of a wrist. For the first time, a hunter did not need to close in to kill. Distance became the new weapon, and safety no longer belonged to those who held the high ground. Archaeological evidence from Ranis cave in Germany confirms that early Homo sapiens mastered these tools around 47,000 years ago. They crafted slender blades, leaf-shaped points, and light shafts designed for speed rather than brute force. Studies published in Nature Ecology and Evolution describe this as a quantum leap in hunting efficiency, a change that allowed small human bands to outcompete larger Neanderthal groups without ever engaging in direct combat. Projectile weapons gave modern humans what researchers call a range advantage, a mathematical edge that turned every encounter into a one-sided exchange. Imagine a hillside that once provided absolute safety. A Neanderthal family shelters inside, confident that no predator can climb fast enough to threaten them. But now, arrows arc upward, whistling through the cold air, striking before the defenders can even see where they came from. The very slope that once multiplied their strength now exposes them. Geometry itself has turned against them. This shift was more than technological, it was psychological. The Neanderthals' sense of control, built over millennia, began to crumble. Every open step outside their caves became a risk. Every movement was watched from below. And unlike their ancestors, who fought at arm's length, these new opponents could kill from a distance so great that retaliation was impossible. It was warfare without confrontation, a silent domination by those who understood that survival could be calculated in meters, not muscles. The introduction of the bow and the atlatl did not just extend the reach of the human arm, it reshaped the very landscape of power. From this point on, survival would favor those who could strike unseen, those who could transform space into strategy. The old balance of stone and strength had been broken. In its place rose a new geometry, one drawn not by the contour of mountains, but by the invisible lines of flight traced by arrows across the Ice Age sky. Once distance became the new weapon, time became the new battlefield. The struggle between Neanderthals and modern humans was not decided in a single clash, but in a slow, grinding siege that unfolded over generations. In the valleys of western Germany, around the limestone ridges of the Rhine, Neanderthal groups held fast to their ancestral caves. From the entrances of places like Feldhofer and Balve, they could still look down on the plains and feel, for a moment, as though nothing had changed. Yet below them, the world was already shifting. Modern human hunters learned to use patience as a form of warfare. A few archers stationed at the valley floor could keep an entire Neanderthal band trapped within a cave. Every time someone stepped out to hunt, to gather wood, or to fetch water, they exposed themselves to the silent arc of a dart or an arrow. The slope that once defended them now betrayed them. Each descent risked death. Each movement was shadowed by the possibility of being seen. This was not open conflict, it was containment. Archaeological evidence from Feldhofer Cave tells the rest of the story. The tools found there belong to the late Mousterian tradition: heavy thrusting spears, scrapers, flakes but no blades, no light projectiles. In contrast, at Ranis and other early modern human sites to the east, we find slender blades, refined points, and the unmistakable signs of advanced projectile technology. The difference between these sites is not just one of material, but of mindset. One culture still relied on closeness, the other had mastered distance. Studies modeling prehistoric population dynamics show how devastating this imbalance could be. When groups compete with unequal hunting efficiency, even a small advantage multiplies over time. Modern humans could hunt more game, feed more children, and sustain larger social networks. Neanderthal groups, isolated and small, could not recover from each loss. A few harsh winters, a few failed hunts, and an entire lineage might vanish. As researchers note, a single decade of resource pressure could erase a generation of Neanderthals. To the Neanderthals inside Feldhofer, the world must have grown unbearably quiet. Their fires burned lower each night as food ran short. The rivers below froze, and herds no longer passed through the valleys. To leave the cave was to risk an invisible death from a weapon they could neither see nor understand. So they waited. But the siege had no end, only exhaustion. Modern humans could rotate hunters, maintain pressure, and move freely between camps. They owned mobility, and with it, the future. For the Neanderthals, time itself became an enemy. Their strength and courage could not change the geometry of survival that had turned against them. What began as a contest of skill became a slow erasure. The siege was not loud, not bloody, it was quiet, cold, and absolute. It ended not with conquest, but with silence. Technology alone never wins a world. What made the difference between Neanderthals and modern humans was not just sharper tools or faster weapons, but the social fabric that sustained them. The bow and the atlatl were symbols of that connection, each one a collaboration between minds and hands, between skill and shared knowledge. A single arrow was never made by one person. It was the result of many, someone gathering wood, another shaping the shaft, another preparing sinew for the bowstring, and others teaching the rhythm of its release. Through this cooperation, modern humans built more than weapons, they built networks. Archaeologists studying early Homo sapiens sites, from Ranis in Germany to the upper valleys of the Danube, have found traces of imported materials, flint from hundreds of miles away, ochre pigments traded across regions. These fragments tell a story of exchange, of information flowing between groups that rarely met face to face. When the environment changed, these networks allowed people to move, to share food, to teach, to adapt. Neanderthal communities, by contrast, were small and often isolated, their range of contact limited to familiar valleys. When disaster struck, there was nowhere to turn. Modern humans also had something else, a culture of teaching. The act of making a bow demanded precision and patience. The process of training to use it required guidance, memory, and language. Anthropologists describe this as cumulative culture. the ability to pass knowledge across generations so that each improvement builds on the last. It's what allowed the technology of distance to evolve rapidly, while Neanderthal tools remained largely unchanged for millennia. In this sense, every arrow fired from a bow was more than a weapon. It was proof of communication, of trust, of planning. It represented the strength of community over the strength of the individual. Where Neanderthals relied on physical closeness, Homo sapiens thrived on social closeness. Their survival strategy was not just to dominate space, but to connect across it. The victory of modern humans, then, was not a triumph of brutality, but of cooperation. The power of distance came from unity, from the shared understanding that knowledge, once exchanged, could outlast any winter. As the centuries passed, nature joined the battle. Around 42,000 years ago, Europe was struck by one of the coldest and most abrupt climate shifts in its history, an event scientists now call Heinrich Event 4. The temperature plummeted, the rivers froze solid, and the forests that once covered the valleys withdrew into the south. Vast plains turned into deserts of ice and wind. The herds that had once fed both species reindeer, horse, and bison migrated beyond reach. What had been a struggle between two kinds of humans now became a struggle against the planet itself. For the Neanderthals of Feldhofer Cave, trapped in their limestone refuge above the frozen Rhine, survival turned into endurance. Their world had already been shrinking under the pressure of human expansion. Now, the cold cut off what little remained. No herds passed through the gorge. No vegetation survived near the cliffs. The only warmth came from firelight and memory. To hunt meant to descend into an open valley, controlled by unseen enemies, armed with weapons that could strike from beyond sight. Hunger crept in slowly, and with it came weakness, disease, and despair. At the same time, modern humans in nearby regions adapted with remarkable flexibility. They tailored clothing from animal hides, stored dried meat, and shared supplies across their network of connected camps. When one group ran short, another sent food or tools. Their social web acted like insulation against disaster. Neanderthal groups, isolated and few, had no such buffer. A single bad season could erase them entirely. Archaeological evidence from Belgium's Goyet and Spy caves suggests that in their final years, some Neanderthal bands may have turned to desperate measures, even consuming their own dead. It was not savagery, but starvation. By then, their population across Europe had fallen to only a few thousand. Genetic studies reveal inbreeding and a critical loss of diversity, a species living on borrowed time. And so, the last Neanderthal winter arrived quietly. In Feldhofer, the fires faded, the smoke thinned, and the echoes that had filled the cave for millennia fell silent. They were surrounded not by armies, but by emptiness cut off by ice, by hunger, and by the reach of a new kind of human who had learned to turn distance itself into survival. When the ice finally began to retreat, the world it left behind no longer belonged to the Neanderthals. From the plains of Germany to the valleys of France, the last traces of their camps faded into the sediment of time. In their place appeared the artifacts of a new species, lighter tools, long blades, and the unmistakable imprint of people who had mastered both space and cooperation. The story of Ranis and Feldhofer is not only a tale of extinction, it is the record of a transformation that redefined what it meant to be human. Ranis represents the beginning of that transformation, the earliest known presence of Homo sapiens north of the Alps. The people of Ranis carried the bow and the atlatl, weapons that extended the reach of the human body far beyond its natural limits. Feldhofer, in contrast, marks the end of an era, the final refuge of a species that had ruled these same valleys for hundreds of thousands of years. Between these two sites lies the thin but decisive boundary between two human worlds, one built on proximity, the other on distance. But distance did more than change the way humans hunted or fought. It reshaped how they thought, how they planned, how they lived together. The ability to strike from afar required coordination, trust, and communication. It demanded that people imagine space in new ways, seeing not just what lay before them, but what lay beyond sight. This way of thinking became the seed of everything that followed: agriculture, exploration, defense, and the organized societies that now span the planet. Archaeologists and geneticists today describe this as the distance revolution, the moment when intelligence turned into leverage and leverage became control. From that point forward, every major step in human history would build on the same principle: the power to act without immediate contact, to influence the world from afar. The disappearance of the Neanderthals was not the end of a story, but the beginning of ours. Their strength, skill, and endurance live on within us, carried in fragments of shared DNA. Yet the legacy that defined the future was the mastery of distance, the understanding that survival is not just about strength or shelter, but about perspective. It is the distance we create, and the ways we choose to bridge it, that continue to shape what it means to be human. The end of the Neanderthals was not a sudden tragedy, but a quiet turning point in the story of our species. It did not happen in a single night or through a single act of conquest. It unfolded slowly, as winter after winter reshaped the land, and as one way of life gave way to another. What disappeared in the frozen valleys of Germany was not just a people, but a pattern of existence, a world built on strength, on closeness, on the confidence that the familiar would always endure. What replaced it was something new, a species that saw survival not in muscle, but in mind. Modern humans learned that distance could be safety, that cooperation could be power, that imagination could project beyond the horizon. The bow and the atlatl were only the beginning. They symbolized a shift in how humans interacted with danger, with nature, and with each other. For the first time, intelligence was turned into reach, and reach became dominance. Yet even as we look back on that ancient victory, the story carries a warning. Every age believes its innovations will save it. But distance, whether measured in weapons, technology, or human connection, can both protect and divide. The same ingenuity that once ensured our survival now challenges us to remain connected, to remember what being human truly means. The Neanderthals vanished, but they are not forgotten. Their endurance, their courage, their trace within our genes remind us that evolution is never only about survival, it is about change. And sometimes, the greatest step forward begins with the moment one world falls silent and another learns to listen.